Welcome to the show, everybody. Micah with Coronavirus Diaries, and today I'm fortunate enough to speak again with Theresa May, the owner-operator of Heaven on Earth Healing. Theresa, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Great. So for any viewers or listeners that are new to the show or are not familiar with Heaven on Earth Healing, would you mind sharing briefly what it is that you do?
Yeah, it's been about 22 years in business. I'm a holistic therapist, life coach, holistic hypnotherapist, healer, uh, energy work, intuitive work, mind body medicine work, pretty much all of that all in one.
So I guess depending on which camp you're in, would this be considered then this to be mainstream, or it's maybe not necessarily considered mainstream?
I think it's finding its way into mainstream because people are starting to look for alternatives to the Western model of, pharmaceutical or surgery or, some kind of a more invasive therapies and stuff, or they're just looking for support. Like it could be much more like complementary to, say, like a psychologist is someone might be seeing a psychologist, but they're also needing a life coach, or someone like me. I also do NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and hypnotherapy. So all of those really kind of support the process that they're already on, and might even eliminate some of the major emotional triggers that send them down into that more bigger imbalance kind of place.
And just for a little bit of clarity, I'm curious myself. Now, you haven't necessarily completely written off Western medicine, correct? Like you still see a place.
Oh,
Okay, right. So I think
yeah.
that might be a general common misperception is that, if people are, firmly positioned like yourself within holistic healing and alternative medicines, that they've written off Western medicine and this idea that there are some benefits. But you're suggesting that it's in addition to, and that it's alternative to maybe resorting like first to pharmaceuticals or maybe some surgeries that may have an impact, like we were talking before we started with back surgeries.
Yes.
There's maybe some deep tissue work, maybe some you were talking about a specific type of massage. I don't know.
Shiatsu. Yeah, shiatsu was what I started out with, and it was probably the biggest aha moment for me in my life, being that beforehand I would have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. And with shiatsu, it totally turned all of that around. I have an example of a woman that I worked with for several years who, her back, she had probably 30 surgeries on her back.
Whoa.
Yeah, to the point that every 6 to 9 months she would go in and they would cauterize the nerves along her spine.
I've heard of people having their vertebrae fused together.
Yes,
Because
she had certain vertebrae that were already
wow,
fused,
couldn't
but
imagine.
she was also in a lot of pain because the nerves kept growing back, which is natural. That's what the body wants to do. So unfortunately, that was just the cycle that she was in. But the body work and the energy work that I would do really relieved the pain for a long time. And the side effect to that, though, is that actually, doing things that are good for the body, like body work and energy work, it actually helps the intelligence of the body to heal itself. So it was kind of, I think it must have sped up the need to have to go back and get things cauterized. So
Really? How does that
yeah,
work?
because her nerves, I think, were growing back faster because of the energy work that we were doing. But in the long run, I think I worked with her for about 3 or 4 years before they moved, and I think she was starting to get. I think that the energy work that was also working, rebuilding the tissue around the discs too. So I think she was starting to get improvement around the discs as well. So it wasn't just telling the body to grow the nerves back, which is a natural response. The body wants to do that. Yeah, that was just a cycle that she was in. But so there's a place for both.
I always
What?
find it amazing when there's somebody that's had a catastrophic accident and they're, paralyzed, or, something happens significant, and they're given the diagnosis, I guess, that it's like, you're never going to walk again. And there's many of these stories, right, where people end up, they say, no, I'm going to figure this out. And it may take some time. They may not ever like run or, perform at a certain level of, athleticism that they may have at some point in the past. But there's plenty of these stories where people end up getting on their feet again, and then walking, and then running, and or swimming, or whatever it is. And it just goes to show you that, it's
Yeah,
a lot of mind,
that's
put your
I
mind over matter.
yes, it is that and more. A really wonderful example of this is Joe Dispenza. Have you heard of him yet?
The name rings a bell. I'm blank. Is it a football player?
No,
No.
he
Way
was
off. Way off.
right. No, Joe Dispenza was a chiropractor and well, he was a triathlete. And this was when he was living on the West Coast, and he was doing a triathlon, and he got hit by an SUV and dragged for 5 blocks.
Yee.
Uh, yes, and the injury to his spine, I think there were 5 or 6 vertebrae that were shattered,
Ouch.
literally. So they said, oh, we need to do immediate surgery, and we're going to fuse your spine. We're going to put rods in. We're going to do all this, work to your spine. And him being a chiropractor, he was like, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want to be like this for the rest of my life.
Right.
He thought it over, and after getting several doctors the same recommendations, they all wanted to fuse his spine, they all wanted to do rods in his spine. He voted against that. He also had this background not just in chiropractic but also in hypnosis, and so he knew that he could tell the body to heal itself. So that was his clue, that was his other option. He was like this extreme Western option of all this surgery and stuff, or let's see what the body can do. And it took about 10 weeks of this mental work, because for at least the first 3 or 4 weeks, he was flat on his back. And
Yeah, I mean, I had a crushed collarbone, and I was out of commission for, geez, it was probably, oh, I want to say I was in this, because it was bad. It was titanium plate and all the things going on, along with nerve damage, but it took months.
yeah,
And then it was like even beyond that before I could get back into doing anything athletic.
yes, and you're young, and
Yeah.
he was probably in his 40s when this happened, 30s or 40s or something when it happened. And yeah, 10 weeks later he was walking and back to work doing chiropractic work. Yes.
Well, and
And
it's Joe Dispenza?
Joe Dispenza,
I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm gonna
his
make a
first
note.
book was
That's great.
written called Evolve the Brain, and then it was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I'm looking to see if I have one of his books just offhand here. I love his work. He travels all over the world to train people how to heal their bodies. And right now his workshops are so full that even 10 months out, they're booking up full, and you get on a waiting list. That's how
So
popular he is.
I like this. Let's go down this a little bit. We kind of been talking
Sure.
about something else before the show, but I really like where this is going. And so you talked about neural NPL,
N- NLP,
NLP. Is that
NLP, which stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming, which
does
came out.
that coincide with hypnosis? Is that an element of hypnosis in any way?
Yeah, I guess I would say that NLP in relation to hypnosis, there is a relationship. Back in the 70s, the founders, the guys that came together and created a strategy for success. Later, it was called neuro linguistic programming. They studied Virginia Satir, Milton Erickson was a hypnotherapist, and Virginia was a family therapist. Milton Erickson was probably the most popular and most successful mysteriously, because he just took an everyday environment, and that was the induction, and it put people into a trance and then spoke to their subconscious mind about just the subtle things that would help them do the change work. Anyway, these computer geeks from college were wanting to study success strategies, and they fell upon these two people, therapists, and then a Gestalt. I forgot the whole history behind that one, but later they called it neurolinguistic, because it's the nervous system that leads our language, creates the nervous system pathway to the source of the memory or the decision or the belief or the value. So
Belief is a big thing, right?
yes, it's huge.
As with everything in life, those who believe they can and those who they believe they can't are both right. It
Yes.
just depends on which way you want to lean, right?
Right, exactly. So NLP came out of the 60s and 70s with, you know, with discovering what success strategies were, how the successful therapists were doing the work that they were doing. And then from that point, NLP really became very popular. It's still very popular around the globe, even more so across the pond, as we'd say.
Yeah.
In the UK and Australia too. But anyway, I digress.
Do you know it? Is that does it have traction in cultures that may be like India or China or Southeast Asia, or is it?
It's kind of interesting. So in other countries, they accept more of the holistic approach to things much more readily, even though Western medicine is across the board everywhere. Like 20 years ago, there were herbalists working side to side in with the doctors, the medical doctors in the UK, and Japan, some other Asian countries. I know China had they had a huge hospital, 2 or 3 floors were body workers, 2 or 3 floors were herbalists, and then acupuncturists and Qigong energy healers on top of the Western medical
Oh,
model. And this was way back in the 60s and 70s.
very cool.
So in Western medicine, or in the United States, it's become more like, well, here we have this holistic approach that's going gangbusters, and I wonder how, and then the medical community said, well, how can we get a piece of the pie? So then psychologists started using the terminology cognitive behavioral psychology.
Sure.
That term came after NLP became successful, and
I
so
learned
did life
about.
coaching.
Yeah.
Life coaching was birthed from NLP as well.
Yeah, I learned about the cognitive behavior therapy from post-military. It was one of the things that I'd heard they were working with in the VA, the Veterans Affairs
Right.
VA hospital a lot. Was, it's kind of back to that saying, those who believe they can and those who believe they can't. So if if you're telling yourself over and over like there's something wrong, or there's issues, you're going to really believe it. And then what do they call it? I think it's called the ABCs. So my friend Dr. Scarborough has talked about this, and there's the terminology, but it's along the lines of thoughts become beliefs, become actions.
Yes.
You start thinking stuff. That's why it's what we surround ourselves with in terms of information, the people, the conversations we have. Those thoughts, they will end up becoming beliefs if you allow them to, and it just depends which road you go down. Can be positive or negative, but
Right.
this is kind of actually down the route that we were initially talking about, discussing in information. I'm kind of curious. So I wanted to tie it back though, because the neuro-linguistic programming, you'd mentioned having had worked with some youth in the past, not necessarily something that you're saying you want to allocate a large portion of your time towards. You're working with more of an adult audience. But you had worked with somebody in the past where, was that what you were doing with them they were very young. There was like a thumb sucking thing going on.
Well, that was I think that was a second grader that was just had this really bad habit of sucking her thumb. And when she came into my office, I just talked to her about, well, what are so when do you do it and why do you do it? Kind of just started from there. And then I started to do an induction, just a very conversational. That's what NLP is. It's very conversational hypnosis or light trance hypnosis. And by the way, I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm doing mind control or anything like that. That is
Well, now,
totally not what I do.
well, you know that now that you said that, everybody will be convinced that you're out here doing my. No, I'm kidding. Come on now.
I just needed to clarify that because I'm not this like psychologist, researcher that wants to, make you do things that you don't want to do.
That's what they would
No.
all say.
Well, anyways,
So what you had worked with this second grader, right? That would have been
right.
considered NLP based on how you approached it, and you got them
Yes,
to
it was
figure stuff out.
conversational. It was conversational hypnosis, and instead of regressing her back to when she started the behavior, I progressed her, and then regressed her back to her present age, which I don't know if that's even a practice, but that's what I ended up doing. It felt right, and I went with it, and I got
So
her up to.
can we dig in? So you helped them progress beyond the thumb sucking, which I'm guessing you were giving them some cues as to what older, more mature kids behave. You get them to see that side of
Yes.
things, and then you say, okay, well, like now you can actually be advanced for your age, and that you don't do this.
And then we went all the way back to her original age. And then from that point on, I guess, from what her parents say, she hasn't sucked her thumb since.
It's great.
So, yeah, that was kind of a fun one. And another one was the athlete, the young boy athlete that would come in with his dad. And he often, he was just so focused on sports and his performance and, how he could up his game. And, he was just a young kid at the time. I think he was only 10 when he first
Oh,
started to
wow.
come to
Yeah.
me. And the last time I saw him was last fall, and he was 16 and getting his driver's license. And yeah, there were times when it was his upping his game wasn't about practicing physically, more so as changing his belief patterns and attitudes around maybe his team members or his coach, or things like that tend to make us second guess ourselves.
Sure.
and
There's plenty
and
of that out in the
and
world these days.
right, so whenever we second guess ourselves, we're losing power. So I just helped him find his power. I just helped
Yeah.
him access his confidence again, and then I reintroduced the stimulus that would have caused the old trigger, and
How
made
would
sure
you, so maybe if you don't mind sharing an example of kind of how you would approach that at some point in the spread between 10 to 16, maybe even just super high level, how would you guide somebody or help somebody find that or just rediscover that thing that they may have always had, but they just stopped doing that?
why would I stop at that age? I do that with
Oh,
adults.
right. But I mean, for that specific case, for somebody that's, that's trying to, find this new sense of belief structure or system of thinking, how do you guide them down that route to discover that? Is it the questions that you're asking? Or are you getting them to ask themselves their own questions without giving away any trade secrets?
Yeah, there's a lot of trade secrets in that. Well, I basically ask them questions that help access the trigger, the negative behavior or the negative thinking or the negative emotional
Self-doubt.
state,
Yeah.
whatever emotion or negative experience that they're having. And then I learn about it, and I just get curious. I get really
Nice.
curious. Well, what kinds of things are playing into this? What's feeding this state, or what's feeding this behavior? And then
Sure.
is it something that's actually supporting this person, or is it not supporting this person? And I have to make sure. So I ask them, what do you get out of it? What's the benefit of doing this? Is this something that we need to keep, or is this something that you really want to change? And then I go from that. As long as I've checked their ecology about making this change, and as long as there's no issues around ecology, like nothing terrible is going to happen if they change their way of being.
Right.
Then we go ahead and do the change work, and I just keep going until we figure out all the missing pieces. So if you imagine a ball of yarn and all these different fragments of yarn that are wrapped around this ball, and
Sure.
sometimes we pull on a string, and it's a really short one. So it solves one little piece of the problem. And sometimes I pull a really long one, and that takes out, a whole lot of behavior that would have been a long stemming issue. Or
Sure.
sometimes I pull on a thread and it wipes out the whole issue completely. So I think that's a really good analogy.
I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, this is definitely, it's something that I'm very fascinated with myself. That's why I also like to speak with Dr. Scarborough about psychology, and all through school, I've been interested in psychology and sociology and just kind of that realm of stuff, right? It's, you don't necessarily see it, but it's there, and it's a thing that's relevant. So I know we're coming up on the time here. I'm curious if you had anything that you were hoping to touch base on that we haven't, or any thoughts, closing thoughts before we go.
Gosh, I really do enjoy all the work that I do. I probably say that every time when you interview me.
That's a good thing though, right?
I do, though. I really get excited. I get excited to help people solve their behaviors or their emotional problems or their whatever it is. It's like I just get curious and I have a lot of fun. And usually the change work is fairly, it's not simple, but it's fairly surprisingly, to them, it feels like magic in a way, because they might have gone to like a psychologist for years, and then they come in with the same issue, and suddenly we get down to the meat of it and solve it in maybe a month. So I really think it's a powerful tool that I use often, even when people call in and they say that they want to do some energy work or something. Usually behind their problem, there might be some psychological or mental, spiritual aspects that are affecting their health and well-being. And so I incorporate NLP wherever it's needed.
Well, I've heard that when the student is ready, the teacher will present themselves. So, I mean, maybe somebody will find this, and they'll find you. And, case in point, or to that point, rather, any viewers, listeners that are interested in reaching out to connect with Theresa May, information is below in the About section, and I'm sure she'd love to hear from you and work with anybody on an individual case-by-case basis. Maybe we'll have to save the digital Zen Lab conversation for the next one. That was really what we were going to go down, talking about the transition into a purely digital platform indefinitely for the duration of this COVID pandemic. So I think we'll have time to speak on that next time. But until then, Theresa, thank you as always. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate being able to chat with you, and it's always interesting. And for the viewers and listeners, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say thank you, Micah, for your time too. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. So for the viewers and listeners, stick around. We got more of these coming at you. I hope you enjoyed this session. Until next time, we'll see you around, and stay safe out there.